I've been playing with a modeler for so long that if you handed me an R121 and an SM57, I wouldn't know whether to eat them or shove them up my... Alright, amp. This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Anyway, so yes, yesterday you might have seen I invested in a Roya 121. Now my buddy Jake currently has that because I wanted him to just check whether it was sort of comparable to his R122. These are expensive microphones, and this is one of the frustrating things for me about trying to use an amp and recording with an amp. These are like, it's a holy grail mic, the R121 in some ways. An SM57 is obviously not thought of in the same sort of esteem because it's like a ubiquitous mic, but at the same time, like, the SM57 has been all over records. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've not heard a record probably without a 57 on it. I have the deluxe reverb. and I was noticing that the R121 was very much low-end focused, darker than I'm used to. I'm someone who likes dark tones in general. I was kind of like, this is too dark. And so I kind of did some experimentation. I read the manual, and the manual says move it like 6 to 8 inches away from the speaker, experiment with that. So for this video, this intro part, I had the 57 and the R121 like about a foot away from the speaker and kind of central to the cone, maybe a bit off axis, but kind of central. And yeah, I don't know what you think about like the tone. I actually thought it sounded really inspiring in the room. It was just a Zen drive and a deluxe reverb on like 2. In the room it's like a very inspiring tone. I was gonna say it's kind of one of the more inspiring room tones that I've ever had without reverb or delay, where just playing it felt right. You listen to the recorded tones of it, does it sound exactly the same as the camera audio? Absolutely not. This is still pretty close miking, and this is one of those things about like, I don't know if you've had this experience of sticking a mic in front of an amp and then asking yourself, is that really what it sounds like? Now, in some ways, yes. I think this is kind of the thing that I've been trying to do, but maybe it just doesn't really make any sense, is that I want to put like something in front of an amp and it sounds like that amp. But necessarily, most mics have some sort of tonal characteristics, even if I'm just putting them through like an audio interface, not through like a posh preamp, which again would impart some other characteristics as well, right? So if I had, for instance, like I showed you this with the voices yesterday, they could make my voice sound very different.
Got both microphones here. You can probably hopefully hear that there's quite a different. Got both microphones here. You can probably hopefully hear that there's quite a different.
One could be really boomy, one could be quite sort of present. This is the difficulty with me, like if I was to be demoing in an amp, it's like I could kind of make it sound really smooth if I stuck the R121 in front of it, or I could make it sound really harsh if I stuck the 57 in front of it. And this just reminds me of that Joe Satriani thing, which he said when he was talking about using the Sans amp plugin for a album that he did. The one about elephants, and it just really hits home, where it's like when you stick a microphone in front of an amp, he was saying, you know, you then are reminded that microphones are not ears, and that you're actually making tonal choices then when you stick a microphone in. And it's the other aspect for this, which is really difficult for me, is that I don't have like an extra room to put this amp in. So what I'm actually hearing whilst I'm playing is all of the amp tone, and then I go back and sometimes it might be a pretty nasty surprise. It's like, oh, was that really what that sounded like? Because of your mic placement, which is in itself a real art. If you had some professionals with you, you'd be sat sort of in front of your monitors and they'd be positioning the mic potentially, or you go, right, well that's not really working for me, you move it, you know, a few millimeters or a centimeter and go, right, well that's closer to what I want. It is, yeah, just a gentle reminder that even if you spend 1,500 quid on this stuff, it's just the start of the journey for sure. And then like the next thing logically for me is like, well then does the preamp need an upgrade? Like you can keep going down this rabbit hole. It's like, well then do I need some API stuff, some Neve stuff? Sacrilege to say, but if I plug in a modeler, I know exactly what I'm going to be getting back. Do you know what I mean? I can dial in the tone accordingly. That's one aspect of modeler workflow which I think is a little bit underrated. And yes, it's maybe not as much of an art as sticking a mic in front of an amp and all of that kind of magical stuff, but at the same time there are other skills involved with, you know, getting good tones out of modelers. So it's just something to think about again, because it's just, yeah, I don't know, I've spent this money, I'm allowed to talk about it, right? Like, well, you know, that money on that mic is spent, and is it something I'm going to use all the time? Not necessarily, because at certain times of the day a modeler is going to be way more appropriate. If I had like an amp to demo, then it would absolutely make sense for me to try and, you know, use a combination of mics. That's mainly what I got the R121 and 57 for, was to have something like an industry standard, so that you as a viewer could get an idea of what those amps might sound like. But at the same time, then I'm listening to what the R121 sounds like, and it's not actually sounding like the amp sounds in the room, if you know what I mean. I have to use the combination, and it's still not sounding like an amp in the room. Do you know what I mean? It's hard. So that was just something I wanted to talk about. Like, the worst part of amps in general, I think, is this part where it's like you can have this glorious sound and you'd be really inspired by it, stick a microphone in front of it, come back to it later, and it's a bit like, well, what's happened there then? I don't know if you guys liked the tones or not, and let me know your thoughts. Was the money wasted, or is it a good investment? Is it going to help me to figure out how some of this stuff works? Hopefully that's the case. But I do have some amp demos coming up, and I thought, you know, it makes sense to have a nice microphone, and maybe I'll get to know this mic a bit better over the years. I don't know, I hope you don't mind coming along that journey with me to some extent. The next part of the rabbit hole is then, do you have to upgrade your actual room? Is it a bedroom studio, or just a bedroom? Is it worth going down that next part of the rabbit hole or not? I don't know, just stick with your modelers.